Welcome to Transbiblical, a podcast where we talk about how gender variation is as ancient as stories about creation. In fact, that's the very first sentence in the new book, Transbiblical. My name is Katie E. Valentine. This is a limited series podcast, and I'm going to bring you authors and friends of the book to talk a lot about gender identities like transgender, non-binary, and so much more, all in conversation with the Bible and other ancient texts. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. We're back for another episode of Transbiblical, and I'm here with the really wonderful Joanna and Aren. Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good. How about you?
Good. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Why don't you both kind of introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do?
Oh, you want me to start? Okay. So I am trained as a scholar of the Hebrew Bible. I'm a scholar and writer of religion. I'd say if I have a tagline, it's I write about sacred words, sacred texts, and what people do with them, how people reproduce, ritualize, revise, live into them. So I write about the Bible, but I sort of fell into that, I think. I'd say I'm more of a scholar of religion. And Bible just happened to be what I fell into doing. I also write about religion and art, calligraphy, lettering art. So there's a whole kind of, I don't like to stay put as a thinker.
Calligraphy. Okay, we'll have to talk. We'll have to talk about that because that
Yes.
sounds really, really cool.
I had a former life as a St. John's Bible apologist, but that's a whole other story. So yeah.
That's great. That's Joanna, and then Aren.
Yeah, so I'm Aren Wilson-Wright. I'm an assistant instructional professor of Northwest Semitics at the University of Chicago. So I mostly teach languages there, a lot of Hebrew and Aramaic, but my training is in Hebrew Bible and the Ancient Near East. And a lot of what I focus on is the religions of ancient Israel, particularly deities, and one of the areas that I like to look at with that is how gender and deities and gender and religious ideas interact in ancient Israel.
Cool. Okay, so we're already pushing the boundaries for deities because that may be new for a lot of people, thinking that there's more than one deity because we're so used to thinking of God, Yahweh, whatever the name is in the Hebrew Bible. Do you have another favorite deity that you like to study?
Well, so my dissertation is on Oftart or Ashtart, I guess would be. It's in the English Bible translations, it's usually translated as like Ashtoret or the Ashtarim or something like that. So that's what I wrote my dissertation on. So I think that would probably be my favorite.
Okay, so she's what might quickly become other people's fan favorites. So I usually see this as Astarte, same deity.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Astarte. That's the Greek rendering.
Yes, New Testament self coming out. Okay, so so Joanna and Aren, this is so fun. So we'll talk a little bit about transbiblical, but we're going to get into a lot of ideas and your stories. So, um, yeah, let's just start there. So, I'd be really curious what your take is on transbiblical and how you envision this being helpful or not, in your line of work and what you do in the world.
Oh, well, I guess I should probably the kind of coda to the first question is we're both trans women. That's sort of the relevance of the day. And as far as I know, there's 3 trans women with PhDs in Hebrew Bible in this country, and we are 2 of them, and we fell in love. So that's our current claim to fame of the moment. So I think maybe that's context for answering your question.
Yeah.
Take this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. Yeah, I mean, I love transbiblical. And I was surprised. As I mentioned, my work is mostly in Hebrew Bible, and a lot of the essays in there are about, Christianity or later Christian thinkers. And I found a lot of those quite helpful as well. I really, really enjoyed the
Oh,
book
nice.
overall. A lot of different approaches that I thought was helpful. So you could sort of pick and choose what approach is most helpful. There were some that were a little bit more hermeneutical, some that were a little bit more historical critical. Particularly enjoyed the historical critical ones. That's where my training is. I'm like my training was like very hardcore historical critical with like a lot of philology. And that is in some of the work that I want to start doing with trans approaches to the Bible to be historical and critical approaches to gender variance, particularly in ancient Israel. So yeah, I really enjoyed the book.
That's cool. Okay, so hold on to that because we'll definitely return to those previews maybe that you can give us about about those ideas that you have. So that's great. So I'm glad the New Testament material was helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
It was great.
great. Nice. Joanna, what about you?
I think I would say I'm still sort of, I feel like I'm still sort of baby trans. So I'm still sort of, it's one thing to live it, it's another to like read the theory. So it's been interesting for me, and I did go to the last QTSR conference in person in 2024. And it's been interesting for me to sort of see how this change in my life will bear fruit as a scholar. So reading this anthology for me has been sort of getting a sampler palette of that, because I wasn't trained in like gender and sexuality and biblical interpretation so much. Um, I think for me right now, the chapter that's resonating the most is Joy. Do you say her last name, Ladine?
Layden.
Layden.
So
Okay, that's
the
what I
trick
thought.
the trick Joy gave me, because every time I talk to Joy, I ask the same question, is Layden, like maiden.
Oh, I would think like laden with joy, you know?
That
Um,
works too, yes.
so
Joy, if you're listening, another way to tell people.
I think her way in resonates with me because her relating trans experience to human experience, which even before my before I realized certain things, I did read her Soul of the Stranger and just loved the way that she wrote and thought. Another essay that's really resonating for me is Esther Brownsmith's. I wrote my dissertation on the Book of Esther. I did have a chapter on gender, not really queer stuff in particular, but I'm well aware Mordecai is a center of a lot of uh, gender play. I won't use the F word. A lot of gender transgression in the Hebrew Bible, and I think the whole book of Esther is really, there's a lot to play with there. So right now, those are the two essays that are resonating the most with me.
And listeners, you can always go back a few episodes. I think maybe Esther's actually the very first episode in Transbiblical. So if you want to read the Book of Esther, yes, and then read Esther Brownsmith's chapter, or listen to Esther's Brownsmith's episode. It gets a little confusing when Esther's first name is the same as the book being written about. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
actually interview Esther, like the biblical character, but
yeah. Well,
Esther
there was
Brownsmith,
a hot
yes.
moment. There was a hot moment I thought about naming myself Judy or Judith, and then I could write about Judith, but that was my birth mom's name, so I had to. It'd be a little weird to name myself after my mom, I felt.
Yeah, and the opportunities for mistaken identities are a lot there. It's a lot. But, Joy's essay, like Joy's chapter, almost everyone says that one was really helpful and really meaningful. And so it's like the gift that just keeps on giving. So and that chapter in particular really shows people ways that they can do this kind of interpretation, no matter who they are. And I think that's really empowering, and gives lots of personal stories about and how she does that and how she takes that to different faith groups and undergraduates and everyone. So I'm so glad. So we'll give Joy more props here. Cool. So hopefully the book and the volume will continue to be helpful for both of you and your own journey, scholarship, whatever it is. The time will tell. But let's also get into your story. So, Joanna, you kind of introduced this with three trans Hebrew Bible people, women in the country, and you're two of them. So tell us a little bit your story, because that just I'm sure got everyone curious. So whatever you're willing to share, about your individual journeys and then journey together.
I mean, why don't you start this one?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of my individual journey. So, um, I didn't realize I was trans until I was 33. So And looking back, there were like a lot of weird things about my childhood that make a lot more sense now. There was a photo of me with like a Raggedy Ann doll when I was like a year and a half old, which is a Christmas present that I really wanted. So there were a lot of signs there. There are a lot of clues, but it took a bit to figure it all out. But yeah, I started transitioning and then came out in 2023 to kind of the guild and to the entire world. And yeah, I've been sort of socially transitioned since then. Um, and yeah, Joanna and I met through a Facebook support group for trans women. I had posted
Wow.
in there, and she was in the support group, and she's like, commented on the post itself, and she's like, "Oh, by the way, are you the author of this article on the Song of Songs?" And I was like, "Yes, that is me. You should add me as a friend."
That's so great.
What you said was, "Girl, what?"
Yes,
Which
I did. No,
yeah, I was like, okay, I guess she's one of us because you was less obvious with you kept your name.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents gave me a very uncommon name, so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
not associated with a particular gender, so I might as well keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I, anything you wanted to say more about your?
Not at the moment, I don't think.
At the moment, yeah, that I would say we both have. I'm going to put non-traditional, and I'm going to put it in big air quotes for the benefit of listeners. When I say the traditional trans narrative, I think it's the sort of I always knew story, which is one story, and I think it's the story that probably like gets the most airplay in pop culture.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But it's not ours. I also figured it out at 33. It was just as much a surprise to me as it was to anyone else. I was like, it was like May of 2023, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to like try on a skirt? And like by the beginning of October, I had come out everywhere, the hormones, all of it. So I had the I later realized as I met more other trans people, I had the most ridiculously speed ran transition I've like ever heard. This is not typical, and I wouldn't recommend it. It was pretty chaotic. But I would say similarly, looking back on my 20s and just being like, how did that idiot not figure it out? A lot of sort of cluelessness about oneself, or feeling like there's just some like part of myself or my like true voice that just I couldn't quite like get there, like there was a sort of glass ceiling on my self-awareness and my emotional awareness that I had to sort of power through. And once I found that sort of doorway lingering somewhere in my subconscious, I had to walk through it. And I would say I've had the benefit of a very supportive community as I transitioned. I did all that during my last year of my PhD, which I also don't recommend trying to write a dissertation while dealing with all the emotional turmoil of, like completely reinventing your public persona, and having to figure out how to dress in a whole new wardrobe and all of that. But I say I've shattered a glass ceiling on my sense of joy, which I'm using the lowercase j, not the person, just to make sure. So I yeah, us meeting was as much a surprise to me as it was to anyone else. But I don't know, sometimes you just find people who have very unusual life experiences, and it's nice to not have to explain yourself to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so there's so many similarities here. You were both the same age.
Yes. Well, she's a few years older, so
but you were each 33 when you
started.
Yeah, when you had your realization and your coming into yourself in this way. And then both had it sounds like pretty quick transitions. Or maybe that was just Joanna.
Joanna had a very quick transition.
Okay, yeah.
So it took me a little bit longer, I think, to open up, or I guess like let people in and let them see like the real me. I took about 2 years before I like came out to everybody and was open with everyone.
And I want to underscore, it's not like I was brave. It was more like I have ADHD and I was being impulsive and not really thinking every step through. I just said, let's do it. But also,
Yeah. And
no, at the time, I was married to my former spouse, who was a transgender man. So, I had the benefit of a spouse, husband, who really understood
Mhm.
being trans in a way that
okay.
most wouldn't. Um,
Right.
I think that gave me a lot of courage. Like seeing he did it, I can do it.
hmm and I love that you're both scholars, but you met in a Facebook group. That there's just something like very wonderful and modern and lovely about that, and then have all these things in common, right? Hope I would imagine
Yes.
um, too. Yeah. Well, this thank you so much for sharing that and telling a bit about your story. So, you both kind of mentioned that you're bringing trans awareness, identities, discourse into your work and into your scholarship, or that
Yes.
it's starting to inform it, or yeah, just tell us a little bit about that. Like, what are your ideas? What are you working on? How does that look for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's starting to inform it more. I did engage with some feminist scholarship, particularly in my dissertation, and some gender theory, particularly when looking at deities. But I hadn't really looked into sort of like trans studies or like trans hermeneutics for understanding these ancient texts. And that's something I definitely want to bring more of into my scholarship. When so I actually had like a hiatus in my academic career for about 3 years. Like when I first started transitioning, I just finished a postdoc and I didn't have an academic position lined up. So I, cobbled together some other work and wasn't really doing any research while I was transitioning. And then once I got this position at the University of Chicago, I was like, yeah, I think it would be great to like actually bring more of myself to the work. Um, and use some of the insights that I've gained from my life in studying these texts. So that is the plan.
Yeah. Yes, yes, very, very cool. And yeah, Joanna, I think you said you went to the QTSR
I did.
conference, and yeah.
And I had been out for like a matter of months at the time. So it was a little intimidating. And I think, early on, I definitely felt a kind of, how academia can pigeonhole you based on your identity. And I remember feeling
Yeah.
like on the one hand, do I really want to be pigeonholed as like, well, because I'm trans, I have to do trans scholarship, this sort of rebellion against being categorized. And on the other hand, part of me feeling like, I think about this stuff all day anyway, I might as well get it on my CV. So I gave a paper there about queering of religious ritual artifacts, because I also do work on like religion and art, religion, material culture. David Morgan was on my doctoral committee. So I gave a paper on that, and that was a lot of fun to give. I was looking at like AIDS memorial books. Uh,
Oh wow, yeah.
I was looking at, I discussed a contemporary Soferet, a female scribe. When I say scribe, like Jewish ritual scribe, like someone who does like Torah scrolls and things like that, um, who put illustrations of Mordecai chest feeding Esther, very
Oh,
explicitly drawing on the imagery of trans men who chest feed, and I'm using chest feed because that's the terminology as I understand it,
hmm
that community that is more accepted, and less dysphoric. So that was a fun paper to give, and I'd say right now, I think is it fair to say like kind of what we have in common as scholars, and that neither of us were like sort of trained specifically in gender and sexuality. And also, neither of us had this sort of neither of us were ever raised in a conservative religious context such that we had to justify our gender within the Bible or within our understandings of it. So I'm very grateful I was never given the beautiful trauma of being an ex-fundamentalist. So, I think for me, I didn't begin with those questions, as I know so many people in our, not only trans biblical scholars, but like queer biblical scholars or feminist biblical scholars often have to do. I do a lot of work in reception, and so I think, I see more potential there. And I have a couple of projects I want to get done now, but down the road. I have a few ideas for larger projects about trans things and religion more broadly.
This is so great. And I love hearing these ideas, and it'll be so fun to revisit these episodes in a few years because the field is changing really quickly. And I've said a couple of times that, we started this book in 2019, like just pre-pandemic. And if we were starting it now, it would look really different because there's different people. A lot of, like, both of you have come out publicly since that time, if my math is correct. Yeah, and so there's a lot more public awareness and out people within, kind of within like religious studies, but also just in the world in general, despite the horribleness that's going on with laws and stuff like that right now. And so, we don't really have we have starting places, like a lot of starting places around gender identity, but there's no consensus, right? There's no, this is the text that everyone reads within biblical studies, right? It's still being formed. And so that's what, hopefully transbiblical will be a little piece of that. And hopefully it'll become, I won't say outdated, but a classic within the field, because people are going to be doing new things, right? And so it's, I think we're all trying to piece together what does this look like now and in the future, and who's, no one really has the answer to that. So it's a beautiful chaotic tapestry of ideas and experiences and everything that we're forming right now. But Aren, I want to run something by you and see, you might tell me that my understanding of this is really outdated and doesn't make any sense anymore, in which case I will I will let it go. But I'm really interested in Aphrodite in Cyprus particularly, and reading some stuff, and this is like not my area of expertise, but there's a lot of chatter about how Aphrodite, particularly in Cyprus, maybe not in like mainland Greece, has all these connections with the Semitic Northwest, especially with Astarte, my pronunciation, and maybe Inanna, and like those three goddesses all have a lot of intermingling and crossover, and that like Aphrodite in Cyprus was a latecomer, but the older expressions have a lot more in common with your goddess of choice. So first of all, let me even just like stop there. Does that is that still true? Or is that like really old stuff?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yay. Okay, good. Because it just rang a bell with me when I was learning that. Sorry, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are inscriptions from Cyprus that refer to a goddess, I think, using various titles. They don't end up using the name Aphrodite until pretty late.
Pretty late, yeah.
One theory is that these titles could refer to, multiple proper names for the deity, like that could, they could be intelligible to both sort of like the native Cypriots as well as, the Phoenician colonists.
Okay.
And there definitely does seem to be a lot of influence in the iconography. Some people have argued that the name Aphrodite, which doesn't really have a good Greek etymology, may come from Phoenician. Couple proposals in that direction. So yeah, absolutely.
So I was in Cyprus three and a half years ago or so, and my very wonderful, loving spouse treks around all these places with me to see ancient sites. So we're going to like every temple that we can go to Aphrodite while we're there. And I didn't expect her to have such an impact. Like I knew she was associated with Cyprus. I was like, yeah, but then I actually ended up really just like kind of falling in love with the expression of the goddess in Cyprus. And then we get to one site and I see Aphrodite and Aphroditos. And there's these expressions of Aphrodite. I don't know that trans is kind of the correct word, but sometimes it's female, sometimes it's male, sometimes it's both. And like the old literature says like dual sex, you know, there's all sorts of problems with that. But right, but we see this. What was that?
And other terms we won't be using.
Yes, many other terms that we won't say. But when I took so I see this just like on the panels and the outside in Cyprus, and I'm of course snapping pictures of this to take home and to research. And so I was like, well, no wonder felt like I was sort of like divinely led to Cyprus. It was just this like last minute, let's go there for a vacation because we live in Europe and get away from the cold Irish winter in January and get to where there's more sunlight. But I kind of felt like I was like divinely guided there for this expression. And so I'm kind of curious, do those same expressions occur that you know of in the, in Palestine or in the Near Eastern world where there's gender creativity, gender fluidity?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that with Ishtar and Othtar. So Ishtar is kind of the Mesopotamian name, but it's cognate with Othtar or Astarte. And so in Mesopotamia, there are texts that mention the bearded Ishtar.
Right.
There are other texts, I think, where grammatically, at least, Ishtar is treated as grammatically masculine. Whether that means, that figure has a masculine gender is unclear, but grammatically, at least, is treated as masculine. And this is also the case in Syria, Palestine as well. So you have both Othtar and Othtart, the T marking the feminine there. So Othtart is kind of the feminine form. Othtar is the masculine form. So there's a god at Ugarit, for example, that's called Othtar. But then you also get, and this is an interesting little twist. So the forms with the T at the end, those are always seem to refer to a feminine deity of some sort. The forms without can be either masculine or feminine.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting, and this is maybe a good segue into something that Joanna and I will be working on, how grammatical gender and sort of the social experience of gender as a phenomenon interact with each other and how they don't always match up in clear ways. And so like that T ending is very common to mark feminine nouns in Semitic languages. But not all feminine nouns have the final T on it. There are ones that don't have it. And so what I argued in the first chapter of my dissertation was that this started off as a feminine noun that didn't have the T. And then it got reinterpreted because it didn't have the T as having a masculine form. And then some people added a T on to then say, no, this one is unambiguously feminine. So there's like a kind of interesting like play with the gender there, with the gender of the deities themselves as well as the grammatical gender of their names.
Well, that's cool. So tell more about the social experiment that you're writing about.
Well, like all academics, we have to brainstorm books, right?
Yes, of course.
Yes, and then like, get people to join us to, peer pressure helps us get writing done. Right?
Yes.
So I guess, where did this begin?
You were invited to write that Song of Songs chapter.
Yes, I was invited to write a chapter on trans approaches to the Song of Songs, or queer readings, which have been done a little bit, but like there's plenty of room for more, for an edited volume that's in the works now, about sort of current approaches to biblical studies, and each volume focusing on a particular book. And I did write my second book on the Song of Songs. We've both published on it. Mine was a lot more about art and visual reception, but it's always been one of my beloved books, fittingly. So we sort of brainstormed, like, what would it look like to think about the Song of Songs if we uncouple things that most scholarship has assumed are always there together. That is the pronouns of the two lovers. We'll just kind of leave them gender neutral.
Mhm.
The physicalities of the two lovers, the gender roles of the two lovers, the gender expressions of the two lovers. Like we call them the man and the woman, but of course we know, and like this is both the lived reality and the sort of theoretical world of LGBT studies. Like in a lot of queer relationships, gender is a thing to play with within a particular setting or a scene, or in part as part of an expression of sexuality. So there's just one example of like kind of there's a lot that we can open up the Song of Songs to, and also there's plenty in the song where uh, there's sort of bits of masculinity to the quote feminine character. Um,
Mm.
so there's more to it. I don't. What else would you want to say about that?
Yeah, and I think another point that we want to make in the chapter is that how we gender the figures in the Song of Songs affects how we interpret the imagery, right? And
Yeah.
how we see their particular embodiment, right? If we sort of link all of these things together, if we say, okay, we see, one set of feminine pronouns and one set of masculine pronouns, like this is, feminine pronoun equals man equals, this body type equals this gender identity, and so on and so forth. And like this sort of set of imagery to describe. And then same, with the lover who's described using feminine pronouns as well. So that like ends up affecting how people interpret the imagery that's in the Song of Songs, and how it's referring to the lovers' bodies. And if you sort of uncouple that, it gives you a lot more room to play with things and understand the imagery in different ways.
When you say uncouple, maybe I wonder if you plural can just say what you mean by that. Do you mean uncouple in terms of assuming that it's a man and a woman, or uncoupling like the way that something may appear in a verse?
Yeah, I think sort of the cis normative assumption that if
Okay.
you know one of these categories, then you know everything else, right? Like if you know someone
Okay.
her pronouns, you know this person is a woman, you have an idea of like what her secondary sex characteristics are, what her gender expression is, what her sexuality. I mean, this I guess also cis heteronormative as well, right? Like there's the assumption that like usually women are attracted to men and vice versa.
Yeah, so this is thank you. That's really helpful. I can't wait to read more. And so this is what interested me so much, especially about material culture, like looking at artifacts, especially with Aphrodite. Because if we look at it with cis expectations, we see what we're trained to see. That follower must that statue must represent a male or a female or whatever it is. But if we look with trans curious eyes, we may see a lot of gender fluidity, right? We may see transness in the ancient world too. So that's really cool. So I can't wait to find out more. What stage is this in? When can listeners look forward to this?
Early stages, because we both have other book projects that we've been
Right, I
on for a
feel you.
while.
Yeah.
I have right now I'm writing a whole book about Martin Wenham, who does calligraphy, a lot of it letter carving in wood, and that's in kind of my religion and art world. I have a dissertation to bookify, so there's other things to be done, but my approach is often also biblical reception, and I think one of the like big things that we've been talking about this whole time that we see in transbiblical is that uh, this isn't brand new. This doesn't fall out of the
Right.
sky. So we're talking about the Song of Songs, for example. There's this long tradition of, the most traditional and the most maligned in contemporary biblical scholarship, all those medieval monks reading the Song of Songs as a chaste love story between, you know, Jesus and the church, or God and the church, or Jesus and the individual soul, right? They sort of parse out the allegory differently. But
Yeah.
there's also something really queer about that. We have all these male monks, we're going to presume male, who are imagining themselves as the female character in the song. Now, there's a whole gender problem there because they're imagining themselves as the female character because she's the receptive one receiving the divine wisdom. Okay, so we could kind of recognize that, but there is some gender play happening there, and I'm not the first to point this out. But it's simply to say that it's not just that gender variance is in the Bible. Gender variance is in how people have read the Bible. It has been for the whole time. And sometimes we find it in the most unexpected places.
Like wood art and calligraphy?
What?
Like wood art and calligraphy?
I'm not really finding it there.
Okay, too bad.
I think a lot of what I'm writing about in the book is how calligraphy and lettering arts raise questions about language and religion more broadly. One of those questions being like we have these metaphors for God, this language for God. We have doctrines, we have dogmas, we have creeds, we have metaphors, and those both live and decay. And we've talked about, feminist theologians talk about maybe we should decenter God the Father a bit more. So this guy's working on found wood. The wood is decaying, so there's kind of an awareness in the materiality of the object. The categories, the words, as beautiful as they are, they too will maybe fall out of favor or fall away, or be, the metaphors will become no longer connect to people. Actually, I think Joy Layden really hits on that well about sort of the limitations of our language for God and the way that maybe God feels put into a box sometimes in a way that's a little, reducing the fullness of who God is. Also, I should say I am Jewish, so there's a whole other reason I love her work.
And Joy's interview for the podcast too, it stayed with me. Our conversation just stayed with me for like 2 or 3 weeks, just living in my head on repeat, and about how God is very strange. And the Christian emphasis is always on the closeness of God and God in our lived lives. And there's some truth in my experience to that, but I also find it really helpful to think of God as very strange. Because then when I'm feeling very strange, it's there's a not a parallel, but a knownness to that. Yeah, and I found that really, really helpful. Way to think about it. But
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, that was it.
I think something we both find is we both are seeing, like with the Song of Songs project, that what we're brainstorming a little bit is maybe at some point writing a broader book about how these questions of gender play into even what I'm gonna use air quotes, like the hard or the technical or the like foundational lower criticism, whatever you want to call it. The most detailed philology often comes with big questions about gender. And I'm going to segue to Aren because I've been yapping enough.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of that is going to be in the Song of Songs chapter, and probably developed more in the book that we will eventually write together. So like part of that, I've alluded to this, is like how grammatical gender in language and like the social expression, the social reality of gender, like don't always line up. And you can see that in English, for example, there are people who use multiple sets of pronouns. And so like, because of that, you can't say like, well, she means woman and like they means non-binary or whatever, right? There are languages that don't have gendered third person pronouns, but the cultures that speak these languages still have gender. There are in biblical Hebrew, for example, some like really interesting phenomenon with the so-called like masculine and feminine endings, right? So like the plural of father takes the feminine plural ending, and the plural of woman takes the masculine plural ending. So this already tells us that these endings, these grammatical morphemes don't neatly line up with our social expectations regarding gender. And that's maybe something to take into account, that, just because a character is referred to using a certain set of gendered pronouns in biblical Hebrew or any other ancient language doesn't necessarily give us license to assume that that character is, the corresponding gender.
Yeah.
Gender, I should put in quotes.
Yeah, we have
Right.
everything's in air quotes. Everything in this whole podcast, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Maybe not. I won't go quite that
far. I mean, I think in discussions of trans and queer biblical interpretation, we often appeal to grammatical gender, and yet there has not yet been a more systematic account of what is grammatical gender, how does it operate, how does it operate in Semitic languages. And Aren, who was trained as a hardcore philologist in comparative Semitics, you actually could do this pretty well.
Yeah, that is the idea for that particular chapter.
Mm-hmm. And we, it's something I remember, it's over and over and over, professors would say, grammatical gender does not connote, I think they would say at the time, biological gender. We might find a different way to say that now. But for listeners, so the idea that la mesa in Spanish doesn't necessarily mean the table is a female or that the table is feminine. It's a table. It just happens to have a grammatical gender, something that we don't do in English anymore. I think Old English did have gendered nouns. But I think you're talking about not objects, but people. And that's I think that'll be a little bit new because we're so used to making that binary. So you're unbinarizing
attempting to
the assumptions there.
Yeah, and in Hebrew, I think it's especially important because, I mean, in English, we've got the third person pronouns. These have gender, but, we don't change the verb for different grammatical genders. We don't have, different forms of the adjective outside of a couple that are borrowed, from French. But, Hebrew is just kind of relentlessly gendered. Verbs, adjectives, everything has to agree for the most part. I mean, there are some famous examples of disagreement, and that's one of the areas I think that we'll be looking at as a way to say, like, these don't always line up in the way that you would expect.
If we create a box, we put things in the box.
Exactly.
Right. If we take the box away, we can kind of see what happens, which is really fun. With Song of Songs, you're just talking about it reminded me, I had an undergraduate once, we were talking about Song of Songs and just having like fun with it. And they said, I was kind of like, it's a very unbound expressions of sexuality, often, in the Song of Songs. The lovers kind of do their things. They don't have the same maybe moral codes that we expect them. And some of my evangelical students or former evangelical students were like, oh no, they were like, this was one of the verses from the Song of Songs is what was used to encourage us to like wait until we're married, to stay chaste. I was like, how? What? And the Song of Songs was used. And I forget which verse it is, but there's some verse about
pleases.
Yeah. There's some verse about like the right time. And I was like, oh, that seems to be taken very out of context to me when we look at that. So, we can create the box for anything, right? And make it fit, which that one was new to me. And that one was kind of funny. Well, this is so really exciting. So tell us a little bit about like why this is so important right now, at our moment in history. So many obvious reasons. So we're recording this in 2025, summer of 2025, for anyone who may be listening far into the future. So political climates go crazy right now. But I'm just kind of curious, like, where are you finding joy and talking about gender identity? Where are you finding that it's maybe making inroads or anything else that you want to talk about?
Did you want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts on this. So, I mean, I think in terms of why is it important now? A lot of people who are transphobic or anti-trans, say that being trans is like this new thing, and that there's no sort of history of gender variance. And I think when they're saying that this is a new thing and it doesn't have a history, what they're saying is we can imagine a future. We want a future in which this is not a thing.
Yeah.
So by looking to the past and recovering all of this history of gender variance, this trans history, we're saying, you know, we have always existed, we will always exist. I think that's very important in this particular moment. Yeah, I guess on a less melancholy note, I mean, it's fun, it's liberating to look
Yeah.
from, you know, a different perspective. It really helps you think outside of, you know, the boxes and binaries that we put ourselves in, and can really just open up new ways of thinking about this text, you know, that's so old and so traditional. But yet, you know, the past is a foreign country, people say, right? Like,
Mm.
and to project our ideas about gender, about, you know, many different things onto the text. And I think taking a trans approach really helps us bring out, you know, different nuances in the text that may have existed in ancient Israel, that, you know, have resonances with what we have today, but also have differences. So it reminds me of Jada Calloway's chapter in the book where she
Hmm.
touch across time, right? Like, we're not saying, like, you know, there were trans men and women in ancient Israel in the way that we understand them. I mean, like, obviously the medical technology wasn't there, you know,
Yeah.
many different things are not the same, but there's a sort of like recognition and touch across time that you can have with these figures if you take a trans approach, which is really gratifying.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really, really helpful.
Um, I guess personally, I think the weirdest thing about 2025 for me has just been the absolute contrast between being trans as such a source of joy in my life and um, then to see it be such a source of hideousness every time I open the news.
Yeah.
It's a weird contrast. And you know, I think one of the beauties of being in a trans relationship is just like you know that you have each other's backs when it comes to the world or when it comes to advocating for yourself. Um, being trans is a very idiosyncratic experience. I think Joy Layden's very correct that in a lot of ways trans experience is human experience. We all cross boundaries. We all find ways that we don't fit into categories. But there's also something very specific about trans experiences, and it's nice to not have to explain yourself to your romantic partner. But I think also Aaron's taking a lot of joy lately in making me learn Magic the Gathering and then beating me
Ah.
mercilessly. Uh,
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I also, we were talking about projects. I have a book I know I need to write. It's one of those like maybe in 10 years I'll be ready. I did not really grow up religious. I had a sort of the one word version is I had a one sentence version. My childhood lacked continuity. We'll put it that way. And when I was in my early 20s, I actually converted to Roman Catholicism. Then I went through the Episcopal Church and then came out the other end Jewish. Um, Actually, here's a fun fact. In my early 20s, I was positive I wanted to become a Jesuit, which is, yeah, things. It's
Full circle, right? Full
funny.
circle
It's
here.
funny,
Yeah.
right? And but those experiences of converting were really intriguing because I'm really intrigued by conversion narratives. What
Mm.
are stories that we tell about our boundary crossings and how are they socially constructed, right? In Christianity, conversion narratives are this huge genre going all the way back to St. Paul, and all the way back to the Gospels and the calling of the disciples. And then in Judaism, you know, it's sort of traditionally, converts are such a small portion of the community.
Yeah.
B, it's seen as like you don't want to talk about it because you don't want the convert to feel ostracized or different. You know, it's supposed to be something that you don't discuss if someone else is a convert because it's a form of public shaming. So conversion narratives in Judaism, like when I was converting, I was looking for stories, memoirs, and I found very few. My favorite, I think, was Love Song by Julius. I can't remember his last, Julius Lester. There you go. I just had to look on my shelf to see it. Um, so I've been thinking a lot about that and narratives of gender conversion, I'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware I'm using a loaded word. I was bouncing this idea off Jada's brain. She's a friend of ours, and she said, a lot of trans people have gone through conversion therapy. That word might be traumatizing.
Yeah.
True, valid. I don't,
I'm hearing playfulness from you though, right? I'm hearing exploration.
Right, like
With it, yeah.
Gender conversion narratives or gender transition narratives are also socially constructed, right? There's this long history of to get certain kinds of gender affirming medical care, trans people having to shape their narrative in a certain way,
Yeah.
for psychologists having to say things like, I always knew having to be attracted to the opposite sex from the one that you identify as. So gender conversion narratives, they're sort of policed by authorities in the way that like religious conversion narratives have been. Um,
Mm.
and I think also there's a whole interesting dichotomy of like, how does the before relate to the after? We have some religious conversion narratives where it's sort of, I once was blind, but now I see. Everything before was awful, and now it's all better. Sort of a major disconnect between the past and the present. Um, and also, then we have religious conversion narratives that were kind of like, I was growing in this way, and it was the next step, but what happened before wasn't terrible. Um, and I feel that way, as someone who transitioned past 20. I had a whole life walking through the world, moving through the world as a guy. I have publications under my old name. I can't really be stealth at all. And I'm okay with that. Um, I know a lot of trans people would find that absolutely horrifying if their dead name was just like in print forever.
Right.
So, the way that we relate the pre-transition to the post-transition self, or the way we present that to the world, can be really different among trans people, just as in religious communities, conversion narratives. So there's a whole book in there. I think I need to live this a little longer before I feel ready to write it. But I definitely know, like in religious studies, there's a whole body of literature on conversion narratives as a genre in different traditions. So there's a lot to start with.
Yeah. And we heard it here first.
Yes, but now for
Yes.
people do, I have to actually do it.
Yes.
So there's going back to the peer pressure.
Yeah,
Yes, accountability. Yes, just like me now, I have to learn Magic the Gathering better because now I've outed myself as learning it.
I
So
did just see I saw for sale somewhere near me a big old several decks of Magic the Gathering, and my Gen Xer heart was filled with joy at this. So I appreciate this conversion. I look forward to hearing about the game. So
okay. Oh no. My failures broadcast to the world.
No, your new learning curve. So this has been such a fun conversation, so filled with joy and with I'm just like a sort of anticipation kind of in the air that I'm really just appreciating. Thank you so much both for being here. Where can people find you if you want them to? Are you on socials or faculty pages? What's best for you?
Well, I mean, I have a website. I think it's a little out of date. But you could. I have a very unusual name. You could just Google it and find me. Google it and find everything. My dead name, my old books, everything. It's all out there. So I'm happy to have someone drop me a line. And Right now, I'm living in Williamsburg, Virginia. I teach at the College of William and Mary. I'm adjunct, so at the end of this coming year, I will hopefully be moving to Chicago for one very obvious reason. And so that is where you will find me, hopefully, in the future.
All right. We'll put it
Yes,
in the show notes too, all the links and everything.
yes.
yeah, I'd love it if people felt like they wanted to contact me. They can use my faculty page. You just Google my name, or I'm sure Katie will put my faculty.
Yeah, I'll link it. Yeah.
Especially love to hear from you if you're also a trans femme Hebrew Bible scholar.
Yes.
See if there are more than 3 of us in the world. That'd be great.
Yes. We know the third. We won't say her name because I don't know if she's public, but
Yeah.
You know, you find it was sort of like people ask how we met. It was bound to happen. You're part of such a tiny niche.
It's happened outside of the niche, which is like the best part. I just love it. So you got to know each other in another way. Well, this is amazing. Thank you both so much. And I think that's it. And we'll sign off and see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us on. It's been great, Katie.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Hey, everyone. Just so you know, I am working on getting a special episode to you with resources around the recent court case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court in the United States in Tennessee around trans stuff that has a lot of transphobia in it. So we're going to be sending you some love and getting you a special issue out really soon. If you can rate, review this episode, it really helps with the algorithms. Wherever you're listening to, just, push pause, click the like button, write a little comment. All you have to say is, love the podcast or anything else that you want to tell us. Really helps with the algorithms. Thanks all, and I will see you really soon.